Joining us now is Sir John Curtice, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Good morning, Sir John Curtice. I mean, what do you make of this result? We've been talking about it all morning, and there's been different ideas of what it's meant to signify. Do you see this as a turning point in Boris Johnson's leadership and the Conservative Party right now?
I think it's confirmation that during the course of the last 6 weeks, we have witnessed a turning point. Though what, of course, is the end point of that journey is as yet inevitably unknown. During the course of the last 6 weeks, the combination of the Owen Paterson affair, which, of course, resulted in this by-election in North Shropshire, together with Partygate, that video which has led to all sorts of allegations about meetings breaking lockdown rules this time last year, the polls have been telling us that that's cost the Conservatives between about 6 and 8 points in terms of their share of the vote. That's a pretty spectacular drop by historical standards. And now we see a by-election, which 2 weeks after a previous by-election, which saw a 13-point drop in Conservative support, bad enough, but shall we say par for the course for the government in a by-election, to a 31-point drop in its support, the second biggest drop in Conservative support in a by-election they've been trying to defend, where there wasn't an unusual third-party intervention. So there is no doubting the size of this rebuff to the Conservatives, and further evidence that the party has indeed now hit something of an electoral hole in the wake of those various scandals to which I've already referred.
But from a national level, who's really the winner out of all of this? Of course, the Liberal Democrats are on the specific by-election. But what's really striking as well about the result is that the Labour Party didn't do very well either. I mean, the smaller parties, even Reform, I think, are disappointed with their results. So from a national level, who would you say has really won out, if anyone?
Well, I think there is at least a small national headline for the Democrats, perhaps not the one that they would want to claim. But that is that it does now look as though that they have regained their position as the traditional party of by-election protest, particularly when Conservative voters were unhappy. That was a position they lost in the wake of their decision in 2010 to join the coalition with the Conservatives. But this is the first by-election that the Democrats have managed to win in what was very unpromising territory. Of course, yes, they won Cheshire and Amersham 6 months ago, but that was in a constituency that had voted Remain. And the Liberal Democrats these days are pretty much the party solely of Remainers. This, however, North Shropshire, is a constituency with a 60% Leave vote. There's no particular reason to expect voters to be switching from the Conservatives to Liberal Democrats because of concerns about Brexit in the way that there was in Cheshire. So I think one has to say, first of all, the Democrats are at least now potentially a threat in by-elections. But sure, this by-election tells us very little, gives us very little evidence of any increase in Labour popularity. Labour's vote was down by 12 points. What it does tell us is that in a constituency in which there's never been a Labour MP, some Labour voters were evidently quite willing to switch to the Democrats because they saw the prospect of giving Boris Johnson a bloody nose. But Labour does need to look coolly and calmly at what the current national polls are saying. They're only putting Labour on 39. Labour's only up by around 4 points or so over the course of the last 6 weeks. And that 39% is no higher than Labour was at 12 months ago. So although the Conservatives are in trouble, and of course, if we would have a general election now, Labour would profit from that, Labour themselves still have to demonstrate that they are beginning to win the trust of voters beyond at least those people who were always relatively inclined to vote for the party.
And Sir John Curtice, I mean, there was a point that you mentioned on Remain, because Cheshire and Amersham, that was a Remain seat. And does this result show that potentially that the Brexit Remain divisions may not be actually at the forefront of voters' minds as much as they may have been a couple of years ago, that a Leave constituency is willing to vote for a party who set itself out as even overturning the Brexit vote? So could this show that maybe people are thinking more beyond Brexit, or does that maybe mean something else?
No, there are a couple of points to bear in mind. I mean, Brexit is still with us. It's the Brexit divide in party support is not as strong now as it was in 2019. But it's still about as strong as it was at the time of the 2017 general election. And in the national polls, the Conservatives are still pretty much 3 times more popular amongst Leave voters than amongst Remain voters, and Labour, meanwhile, are at least twice as popular amongst Remain voters and Leave voters. So the residue is still there. But of course, what voters seem to be concerned about the government at the moment is not so much about Brexit, but about ethics. It's about the ethics of how it tried to salvage Owen Paterson's political career. It's about how, above all, there are now numerous allegations about the party, including those close to the Prime Minister, allegedly breaking the rules on lockdown from 12 months ago. And we learned from the Dominic Cummings affair that there is no constituency out there amongst either Remainers or Leavers for defending a government that people feel has not been dealing with them fairly on an issue about which, it's affected everybody's lives and about which some people feel very strongly indeed. Fairness in a pandemic is crucial. So that's what's giving the government trouble. That said, it is worth noting that it is amongst Leave voters that the Conservative vote in the polls is falling most of all, because the Conservative Party does need to remember many of those Leave voters were first-time Conservative voters in 2019. They are perhaps above all the voters without much in the way of loyalty to the Conservative Party, and who are therefore perhaps particularly vulnerable if they begin to doubt the Conservatives' ethics and perhaps also their competence.
And just final question very quickly, how do Labour come back from this? I mean, they don't have any seats practically. In Scotland, they're now losing in by-elections that, at this point, they really should be willing with all of the different controversies around the Conservative Party. And they're supporting the government at every way when it comes to lockdown policies. I mean, is there any way that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party can really find a route to power at all?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by power. Winning an overall majority for Labour is going to be very difficult, as you say, not least because the party looks as though it can't win very much in the way of seats in Scotland. But we also have to bear in mind that the Conservatives do not have any friends in the House of Commons. There is no other party now inside the House of Commons who will be willing to help to sustain a minority Conservative administration. So if we were to get a hung parliament in the next election, even if it's a hung parliament in which the Conservatives have more seats than Labour, the Conservatives will probably be out on their ear. So this is potentially a very unusual contest. But the crucial thing above all that Labour now need to do, and it's been evident for some time, they have to begin to show the leadership that they claim Boris Johnson is lacking, by which I mean the Labour Party needs to start to beginning to say what it would do if it were in office. Okay. And given that we are now in a situation in which the government is reliant on Labour's votes to deal with the public health crisis, that probably needs to start with being clear as to whether or not they agree with the UK government about how to handle the pandemic, i.e. we do not need further restrictions, or whether they agree with the devolved administrations, including the Labour administration in Wales, that perhaps we do.
Good stuff. Sir John Curtice there. Thank you very, very much. Really, really enjoyed that, actually.